The Canadian Race Relations Foundation brings together people who are engaged in the ongoing dialogue about race relations and multiculturalism in Canada. Since the launch of the Foundation's Urban Agenda Roundtable series, media reports on racism and discrimination in Canada continue. The City of Winnipeg became the center of national attention after an article was published by Maclean's magazine, entitled "Welcome to Winnipeg, where Canada's racism problem is at its worst."
On January 22nd of this year, Maclean's published an article labeling Winnipeg, the Canadian city renowned for our generosity and for our compassion, as the most racist city in Canada. Later that same day, in an act of unity, this community came together to admit a difficult problem that none of us are proud of. When we could have split as a community divided and blamed or excused, Winnipeg chose the courageous path of truth in an ugly and shameful moment.
Mayor Bowman responded by organizing ONE, the Mayor's National Summit on Racial Inclusion.
It's my hope that our journey will improve our ability to acknowledge that we do have a problem. More impactfully than any press conference or summit is the honest discussion at work, out in the community, with family members and with friends, when the cameras are off and we continue speaking the truth, even in private. These aren't just federal issues, these aren't just provincial issues, these are our issues to fix in municipalities across Canada as well.
This place connects us to Indigenous ancestors who followed the waterways here, to the center of the continent for peacemaking, dialogue, and trade.
I just want to tell you, back in 1965, we dreamt wistfully, would we ever reach the time when our children would have that equality of opportunity to reach their potential, not necessarily their full potential, because it's still not done.
I was taught by my mother and my grandmother to always pray in my language. That is why I'm here today. I've been given the traditional tobacco offering for me to do this prayer. And I pray for all people all over the world. Doesn't matter what color skin you are, I pray for all people. I pray for our children and our grandchildren.
And as Elder Kelly pointed out earlier, and also by your worship, that is so important that we don't forget that dignity, human dignity, inherent human dignity is really important, and we need to honor each other. If we do honor the inherent human dignity of each other, all the human rights would come naturally. We don't have to fight against each other.
In that spirit, the ONE Summit was an opportunity to come together, to learn from one another, and to ask, how do we recognize racism in our communities and in ourselves?
All of us, in some way or another, typecast, stereotype, or make decisions based on beliefs that are rooted in the same untruths as racism.
Le racisme commence à la table de souper le soir et dans la voiture en allant au chalet.
One of the greatest feeders of intolerance is the fear of the other.
I believe that communication is the key, that education, and communication is predicated upon three primary principles. I must understand you. If I don't understand you, I cannot communicate with you.
So if you can somehow just wave a wand and get rid of poverty, you would get rid of so much racism because we would be more equal, we would be more together.
Je vous dirais ceci, on ne naît pas raciste, on le devient.
I must understand you, and in order for me to understand you, I've got to ask questions about you. You've got to hear my pain. I've got to hear your pain.
It shouldn't be that Aboriginal lives matter or that Black lives matter.
All lives matter. All lives matter.
It should be that.
Well, teach.
that all lives matter.
Et le plus souvent, quand les enfants sont endoctrinés très tôt, c'est difficile de se débarrasser du racisme.
Of course, it's never that simple. There is no magic wand. So we all have to do the hard work. We have to do the daily work. We all have to be willing to get our hands dirty.
There's got to be some mutual understanding. Then there's respect. If there's no respect, there can be no communication. And if there's no trust, it's all dead.
As the old saying goes, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So changing the culture within City Hall, within council, within the City of Winnipeg, within Winnipeg, within Manitoba is going to be a daunting challenge. But I think we're on the way to doing that.
When you get to know a person from a place very different from where you come from, you begin to realize that the person isn't necessarily all that different from you.
And it's so emotional thinking that in a country as progressive as ours, that people would be alienated, isolated, persecuted for something that is beautiful.
We must take this opportunity to look for ways to inspire introspection and personal accountability that we can get into everybody's individual toolbox, because change, it starts from within.
The Canadian Race Relations Foundation held its Winnipeg Roundtable as part of the One Summit. At the culminating session, the question was asked, how do we move forward towards racial justice and reconciliation?
The dialogue at the summit is being put together to confront the racism among us, but most importantly, to move us along the path towards social harmony.
So that's why I have the talking stick here, because it helps remind me of all of the ways that we carry out our work.
I know for me it's incredibly important that we have the diverse voices around the table at all points in the conversation.
I think that these sorts of projects have to have a public community engagement component. So it's not simply a report that goes on a shelf, but something that conceivably could be a catalyst to action.
So I think when we are talking about education, we need to really come down to the true history of what is this country. I would say the good and the ugly side of Canada. Because if we continue to give one part of a story of the prosperous, I would say white, privileged, Eurocentric approaches, we are really leaving out the Aboriginal people who were here when this nation was created.
One thing that we're doing is documenting this way of knowing, being, doing, and feeling, and that's the name of the model that the community has defined. And it really is driven by an Indigenous perspective, an Indigenous knowledge base, an Indigenous value base. And when we say that, people start saying, oh, well, oh, this is just an Indigenous thing then. No, it's not. It is for all the kids in Point Douglas. An Indigenous way of knowing, being, and doing is good for all kids in Point Douglas, for all Manitobans, and all Canadians.
I think that there's reconciliation. I think there's agency, there's strength when people can see their experience reflected in projects, and they can learn about things and they realize they're not alone.
We are leaving out the Japanese and the Chinese who came here despite that they didn't have their spouses and families with them. We are leaving out many of us who are immigrants and refugees.
Not everybody's going to agree, but dissent can actually be the most informative part of your process. It's where you actually learn new things, and that is actually what leads to the breakthroughs when people disagree or they push back or they challenge and say, well, what about this? That actually is when we grow.
Things that we can put in our toolbox, giving people a voice, empowering a community, creating space for dialogue, embracing different perspectives, different values. Anything else to add to the toolbox?
If I could just shift it a tiny bit. Again, it's not giving me a voice. I have a voice. I've always had a voice. And usually I have to kick in the door before somebody will listen to the voice. It's really nice when the door's opened and you're invited in.
The Urban Agenda Roundtable in Winnipeg brought together leaders, community organizations, and citizens from across Winnipeg and Canada. Here, ideas were shared and initiatives were born to promote racial inclusion in all our communities.
bourgeoisie. Way